The day was dull and overcast when I drove into Hollow Creek. The sun was completely hidden behind thick clouds, casting a gray shadow over everything. The road into town was narrow, flanked by gnarled trees that looked like they were barely holding on. I had come here to take over an old mansion my uncle left me. I didn't know the guy very well, and honestly, I didn't care much about the house either. People said the place was haunted, but I thought it was just local gossip. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, and I wasn't about to let some old stories bother me. When I finally saw the mansion, it was as gloomy as the rest of the day. The tall, dark building looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I parked the car in the driveway and got out into the chill of the evening. The house was covered in ivy, and its windows were dark and dusty. I pushed open the front door, which creaked loudly, and walked inside. The place was as you'd expect an old house to be, dusty and musty. Grand staircase was covered in cobwebs, and the floor was thick with dust. Every step I took seemed to stir up more of the stuff, but I didn't care. "Welcome home," I said to myself, though I didn't really mean it. I started exploring the house, beginning with the library. The room was filled with old bookshelves packed with dusty volumes. While browsing, I found an old journal hidden away on a high shelf. I flipped through the journal, and it was filled with strange writings about weird noises, shadows, and feeling like someone was watching. I didn't give it much thought, just more of the same ghost stories you hear everywhere. I wasn't going to let it bother me. As night fell, the mansion made some noises, creaks and groans, the usual stuff with old buildings. The wind outside rattled the windows, but it didn't bother me. I tried to get some sleep, but the sounds of the house and the journal's stories were just background noise. Lying in bed, I stared up at the ceiling, thinking about how ridiculous it was to worry about old ghost stories. The house felt like any other old place, creaky and drafty, but nothing to get worked up over. The next morning, I woke up to the same gray skies and the persistent chill in the air. I had managed to sleep a few hours, despite the unsettling noises from the house. I decided to spend the day getting the mansion in order, figuring that keeping busy would be the best way to ignore the creepy stories from the journal. I started with the kitchen, clearing out old, cobweb-covered cabinets and scrubbing away layers of grime. As I worked, I found myself thinking more about the journal. Even though I didn't believe in ghosts, the strange writings were starting to gnaw at me. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, because I was in a new old house. Later, I decided to explore the basement. The house was huge, and there were parts I hadn't yet seen. I found the basement door behind a dusty curtain. When I opened it, a rush of musty air hit me. The basement was dark, and the stairs creaked ominously as I descended. Once downstairs, I used a flashlight to navigate the space. The basement was filled with old furniture, boxes, and forgotten belongings. I rummaged through a few boxes and found some old family photos and letters. Nothing particularly interesting, just memories left behind. But then I came across a box labeled Family Secrets. It was odd, but I figured it was worth a look. Inside, I found old documents and a faded photograph of a woman I didn't recognize. There was also a small, ornate key. Looked ancient. I couldn't help but wonder what it might unlock. I brought the box upstairs and set it on a table. I was about to examine the key further when I heard a faint, scratching sound coming from one of the walls. It was the kind of sound you hear when you're trying to ignore something. My initial reaction was to brush it off, but it kept going, persistent and annoying. I decided to check it out, though I told myself it was probably just some animals getting into the walls. Didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but the scratching continued. The sound seemed to be coming from behind a section of wall that looked like it might be a hidden space. Ignoring the growing sense of unease, I grabbed a tool to pry open the wall. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just some more old junk. But as I worked, the wall gave way to reveal a small, dusty room with old furniture and cobwebs. There was a dusty old trunk in the corner, and as I approached it, the scratching sound suddenly stopped. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but pushed it aside. I opened the trunk, expecting to find more forgotten items. Inside, I found old clothes, more photos, and a diary that looked much older than the one I had found earlier. The diary was locked, but it looked like it might be important. I held it up, examining it closely. It seemed like a strange coincidence to find it here, hidden away in a secret room. I decided to take it upstairs and look at it later. The day dragged on, and the mansion seemed to grow colder and more oppressive. As evening approached, I found myself increasingly absorbed by the old diary I had discovered. I set up a small reading area in the library and started examining the diary's content. The lock on it was old and rusty, but I managed to pry it open with a screwdriver. Pages inside were filled with scrawled handwriting, similar to the journal I'd found earlier. But this diary was more detailed, describing in vivid detail eerie happenings and strange encounters. The writer spoke of feeling a presence in the house, someone or something watching from the shadows. I tried to push the growing sense of unease aside. I told myself it was just an old diary filled with overactive imagination. As I read through more entries, I noticed a recurring mention of a particular room in the house, a room that was never used and always kept locked. Curious, I decided to investigate this room. I had noticed an old, heavy door at the end of the hallway on the second floor, but it had been locked and unused. The diary's entries suggested that this room held some sort of key to understanding the haunting. I went to the door and found it as I remembered, rusty and old, with a heavy lock on. I took out the key I had found in the basement, wondering if it might fit. To my surprise, it did. The lock clicked open with a satisfying sound, and I slowly pushed the door ajar. Inside, the room was dark and musty. I turned on my flashlight and shone it around. The room was filled with old furniture covered in dust, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. At the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror covered with a sheet. I approached the mirror, feeling a chill. As I pulled the sheet away, the mirror revealed a tarnished and dusty surface. I stared at my reflection, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow move behind me. I spun around quickly, but there was nothing there. Brushing it off as a trick of the light, I continued to explore the room. I found an old trunk in the corner, similar to the one in the basement. It was locked, but the key I had might fit. With a sense of anticipation, I unlocked it and found old letters and documents inside. Among the papers, there was one that stood out, a letter written in a shaky hand, detailing a terrifying encounter with something supernatural. The writer spoke of seeing a ghostly figure in the mirror and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. My heart pounded as I read the letter. The descriptions matched some of the strange feelings I'd had. I was about to put the letter back when I heard a noise, a soft, scraping sound coming from behind me. I turned around, expecting to see nothing, but the air felt colder. I glanced at the mirror and saw something moving in the reflection. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a dark shape standing behind me in the mirror, even though I knew nothing was there. I spun around again, but there was nothing. The room felt heavier, the air thick with an oppressive weight. My skepticism was beginning to waver, and a growing fear started to creep in. I quickly left the room, locking the door behind me. I didn't want to spend another moment there. That night, I was on edge. The events of the day had shaken my disbelief, and the house felt different, almost alive with a sinister presence. I tried to focus on getting some rest. Sleep was elusive. Every creak and groan of the house seemed louder and more menacing. I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The letter I had found kept replaying in my mind, especially the part about the ghostly figure in the mirror. I tried to tell myself it was just an old story, but the fear I felt was real and unsettling. Around midnight, I heard a faint whispering coming from the hallway. I sat up, straining to listen. The whispers were indistinct, like a conversation just out of earshot. I got out of bed and cautiously walked to the door. The whispering stopped as soon as I opened it. I stepped into the hallway, flashlight in hand, and walked towards the source of the sound. The air felt colder, and a strange, oppressive weight pressed down on me. I reached the end of the hallway and found nothing out of the ordinary. The whispering had stopped, leaving only the eerie silence of the house. I turned to head back to my room when I noticed a faint, flickering light coming from under the door to the room I had unlocked earlier. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I had locked that door before going to bed. How could the light be on? My curiosity got the better of me, and I approached the door. I tried the handle, and it turned easily. I pushed the door open, and the light flickered off as soon as I entered. The room was dark, and nothing seemed out of place. I checked the mirror, but it was covered once more. Just then, I heard the whispering again, this time louder and more urgent. Seemed to be coming from the mirror. I felt a sudden chill, and the temperature in the room dropped significantly. My breath came out in visible puffs. I approached the mirror, my heart pounding. The whispering grew louder, almost like a chant. I pulled the sheet away from the mirror, and as the surface was exposed, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The reflection was not just mine. There was a shadowy figure standing behind me. I turned around quickly. The room was empty. The shadowy figure was only visible in the mirror. I could see its dark form clearly now, and it seemed to be moving closer. My fear was overwhelming, and I stumbled back from the mirror, knocking over a lamp. The lamp shattered on the floor, plunging the room into darkness. I felt an icy hand brush against my neck, and I let out a terrified scream. I fumbled for the flashlight and managed to turn it on. The beam of light revealed nothing out of the ordinary, but the fear remained. I left the room quickly, locking the door behind me. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The whispers and the shadowy figure were too much. I decided to head to the kitchen to get some water, hoping that would calm my nerves. As I walked through the dark house, every sound seemed amplified. The whispering continued, faint but persistent, echoing through the empty halls. My mind raced with questions and fears, and I could no longer ignore the fact that something was terribly wrong. The kitchen offered no comfort. The dim light of the overhead bulb did little to chase away the shadows that seemed to cling to the corners of the room. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to steady my nerves. The events of the night were beginning to wear on me, and my skepticism was eroding faster than I cared to admit. As I drank the water, I heard a sudden, loud bang, coming from the direction of the library. I nearly dropped my glass. My heart raced as I put it down and headed cautiously towards the noise. The sound was as though something heavy had fallen or been thrown. I entered the library, flashlight in hand, and saw that books and papers were scattered across the floor. It looked like someone or something had been rummaging through the place. I scanned the room, trying to make sense of the mess, but nothing seemed out of place aside from the disarray. Then I noticed something peculiar. The journal I had been reading earlier was lying open on the floor, pages fluttering as though disturbed by a breeze. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and began to read through the entry. The handwriting was frantic, describing how the writer had felt increasingly threatened by unseen forces. A new entry caught my eye. It spoke of a dark ritual performed in the house long ago, involving a mirror that was said to be a gateway to another realm. According to the diary, the mirror had been cursed, and anyone who looked into it might see something that wasn't supposed to be there, something trapped between worlds. As I read, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, causing the papers to scatter again. I turned around, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the shadowy figure from earlier dart across the doorway. My pulse quickened. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The mirror was somehow connected to these events. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I went back to the room with the mirror. The fear in my chest was now a full-blown terror, but I had to face it. I unlocked the door, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The room was dark, and the mirror stood there, covered in a sheet. I removed the sheet carefully, revealing the tarnished glass. As I stared into it, I hoped for some explanation, anything to make sense of the shadowy figure I had seen. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, and the whispering began again, louder this time. I could make out fragments of words. Help me. Trapped. Escape. The mirror's surface started to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. A figure began to materialize in the mirror, its features obscured by darkness. It looked like a person, but its form was distorted and shifting. It reached out towards me, its expression one of desperation and pain. I could feel its gaze, as though it was pleading for help. I stumbled back, unable to tear my eyes away from the mirror. The figure's outstretched hand seemed to reach through the glass. and I felt an icy grip on my arm. I cried out, trying to pull away, but the grip tightened, and a cold force began to drag me closer to the mirror. Panicked, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy book, and smashed it against the mirror. Glass cracked, and the figure disappeared, leaving only a fractured reflection of myself. The room was suddenly quiet again, whispers gone. I stood there, panting heavily, my mind reeling from the encounter. The mirror was now just a shattered piece of glass, but the terror I felt was very real. I had to find out more about this mirror and the dark history of the house, or I might not make it through the night. The remnants of the mirror lay scattered on the floor, and the eerie silence in the room was almost as oppressive as the fear I felt. I could still feel the icy grip of the shadowy figure on my arm, and my heart was racing as I tried to calm myself. The ghostly presence was stronger than ever, and I knew I had to uncover the truth if I wanted to escape this nightmare. I gathered my courage and decided to explore the house further. There had to be more clues about the dark history of this place. I headed to the attic, a part of the mansion I hadn't yet explored. The attic was rumored to hold secrets about the house, and I hoped I might find answers there. The stairs leading up to the attic creaked loudly under my weight. The door at the top was heavy and old, and it took some effort to push it open. Inside, the attic was dark and filled with old trunks, dusty furniture, and forgotten belongings. I turned on my flashlight and began to sift through the items, hoping to find something that might explain the supernatural occurrences. Among the dusty boxes and old furniture, I found a large, ancient chest. It was locked, but it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The key I had found earlier didn't fit, so I decided to force it open. After some effort, the lock finally gave way, and I opened the chest with a sense of anticipation. Inside, I discovered old documents, photographs, and a collection of strange artifacts. One item stood out, a detailed family tree that traced back to the early 1800s. At the bottom of the tree was a note written in a shaky hand, describing a curse placed upon the family. It spoke of a dark ritual performed by a member of the family who had dabbled in forbidden practices. The note detailed how the ritual had summoned a dark entity, which was bound to the mansion and trapped in the mirror. It also mentioned that the entity fed on fear and would become stronger as its victims' terror grew. The only way to break the curse was to confront the entity and destroy the mirror. I realized that the mirror wasn't just a piece of glass. It was a prison for the entity. I had to act quickly before it gained more power. Determined to end this, I gathered the artifacts and documents, hoping they would provide some help. I returned to the room where the mirror had been, now only a shattered frame. I felt a sense of dread as I entered, but I was resolved to face whatever was left of the entity. I arranged the artifacts in a circle on the floor, following the instructions from the note. As I completed the ritual, the temperature in the room plummeted again, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The shadows in the room seemed to gather and swirl around me. I could feel the entity's presence, stronger than before. As the sun rose over the mansion, the first rays of light filtered through the dusty windows, casting a warm glow over the now quiet rooms. The oppressive weight that had hung over the house for days had lifted, leaving behind a calm, serene atmosphere. I felt a deep sense of relief as I walked through the halls. The shadows and whispers that had plagued me now, just a memory. The artifacts and documents from the attic were now packed away, their secrets revealed and the curse broken. The mirror's shattered frame was carefully stored away, a reminder of the dark entity that had once lurked within its glass. I knew that I had faced my fears and emerged stronger for it. The mansion, once a place of terror and darkness, now felt like a new beginning. I decided to stay a few more days to ensure everything was in order and to start fresh. The tasks ahead were now about restoring the house to its former glory, not dealing with supernatural threats. In the following weeks, I worked on renovating the mansion, transforming it from a haunted relic into a welcoming home. As I painted walls, repaired floors, and cleaned out the old rooms, I felt a growing sense of accomplishment and peace. The house had been given a second chance, and so had I. The old family tree and the documents were preserved as historical artifacts, a reminder of the mansion's dark past and the courage it took to overcome it. The stories of the haunted mansion would remain in the history books, a tale of fear, bravery, and ultimately, redemption. With the house now a place of comfort and safety, I moved on with my life, carrying with me the lessons learned from my harrowing experience. The echoes of the forgotten were no longer a part of my daily life, but I would always remember the chilling encounters and the bravery it took to confront them. As I looked out over the newly restored mansion, I felt a profound sense of peace. The house, like me, had been through a great deal and had emerged stronger. It was ready for a new chapter, and so was I. The darkness had been vanquished, and the light had returned. With the mansion behind me and my heart at ease, I knew that the story of echoes of the forgotten come to a close. The fear had been faced, the curse broken, and the house had been redeemed. The echoes of the past were finally silent,